All right, hey everybody, macro students. This is a video that I'm making on topic 3.8 and 3.9 to wrap up Unit 3 of AP Macroeconomics. And this video is going to discuss the characteristics of fiscal policy and when it can be used given a macroeconomic situation. We're going to tie in the role of the multiplier here as well. And then automatic stabilizers, and we're going to tie that into discretionary and non-discretionary spending. So the image you see in the background, that's former President Barack Obama discussing fiscal policy with members of Congress, and I felt like this image really emphasizes the importance of fiscal policy because you see the two of the more important players in fiscal policy represented here in this picture, and those are members of Congress from Mitch McConnell down and Dick Durbin down there at the bottom to the right of the image, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. You got John Boehner, who is the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi next to him, who is the current Speaker of the House, Eric Cantor, the Republican minority leader there on the far left, and right in the middle, President Barack Obama. So you have Congress and the president represented in this image, and those are the people who really control fiscal policy. So let's get into it. What I recommend you do here in the video is pause it, jot down the notes on the slide. I got some graphing practice that I will do with you guys in a little bit, and we're going to tie this into some AP Classroom practice questions as well. Okay. So after World War II, the United States emerged from World War II as a very strong economic power, came out as one of the world's leading economic powerhouses, but Congress wanted to make some changes because World War II had really helped correct what was wrong with the United States, and that was the Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted from roughly 1929 to 1940, 1941, and the United States wanted to ensure that the economy would never go through a situation like that again. A 10 to 12 year period of high unemployment rates, very low economic growth, very poor economic production, and just really stagnation throughout the economy. So Congress passed an act known as the Employment Act of 1946, which tasked Congress with ensuring that a Great Depression would never happen again. And so this act gave Congress far more power and emphasized the role of Congress in making sure that unemployment rates stayed low, that inflation stayed under control, and trying to keep the economy at full employment as much as possible. And so it gave Congress two tools to ensure that full employment would be as relevant in the economy as much as possible. And so those two tools are taxes and government spending. And so the government mainly gets its revenue from taxes, and what's listed there are some of the taxes that the government, both state and federal, can levy, from Social Security taxes to taxes on businesses and firms, corporate taxes, to our national income tax, which is a progressive tax, meaning that as you earn more money, you pay a higher tax rate. And what the government does with this is they have what are known as outlays. These are transfer payments, money that is spent on infrastructure, healthcare, the military, postal service, schools, grants. The government spends money on a wide variety of goods and services and programs. And so as the government does this, as the government takes in money, the theory behind it is, well, as the government takes money in from taxes, that's their revenue. The money they take in from taxes should be spent on the economy. You shouldn't spend more than you're taking in. Unfortunately, that's happened throughout the history of the U.S. government. There's been times where the U.S. government runs what's known as a budget deficit. There's other times in our history where the U.S. government runs what's known as a budget surplus. So really quick, pause the video if you'd like. Brainstorm what the difference is between a surplus and a deficit. Okay, what this shows here, this is the link that was shared with you in the slides that I just had up. This is the U.S. Budget, and if you see here, this dates all the way back. This is courtesy of the St. Louis Fed. They got a lot of great information here on this website. This is just one of them. So this dates all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. And notice that 0 represents that the United States is exactly spending as much as it's taking in. So throughout the 1930s, up until about World War II, the United States was doing fine. They didn't really run either a budget deficit or a surplus. And if they did, it was very minimal. So coming back to that question, a deficit is when the government is spending more than it's taking in. Outlays are exceeding revenue. If you want to use macroeconomic terms there, outlays are exceeding revenue. A government surplus, a budget surplus, is when outlays are less than revenue, or vice versa. When the government is taking in more than it's spending, that's when they're running a surplus. Surplus is when the government has money left over. If you want to use it in layman's terms, a deficit is when the government has to dip into its reserves or is borrowing money. So you'll notice as you track this, the United States had to borrow a significant amount of money during World War II to pay for the military. And then began to raise taxes again and cut spending in the late 40s after the war ended. I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but you notice that the government was doing a pretty good job of making sure it was spending just about as much as it was taking in. And then, all of a sudden, the late 70s hit, the 80s hit, the 90s hit, we got back to a balanced budget. We actually had a budget surplus going into 2000s, and then 9/11 occurs, and you have a drastic increase in the role of the government in combating terrorism. And also, there were some demographic changes during this time as the U.S. workforce began to get older. So you had a significant amount of people beginning to retire, which puts more emphasis on Social Security. So now the government is paying out more money in outlays to Social Security, which only increases the budget deficits. Got it a little bit under control going into 2007, and then the market crashes. The housing market crashes, plunges the United States into even further deficit. I'll explain why in a little bit. Got it back under control, and then for a variety of reasons, our budget deficit is at its worst of all time as of 2020. So this is something that, it's interesting. You could spend classes upon classes talking about what caused a surplus here, what caused a budget deficit here. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do that. I will say that the 1980s were a period of tax cuts and increased government spending during the Cold War to try and combat the growing influence of Russian communism throughout the globe. Under President Reagan, they significantly increased the military budget and also cut taxes. And in a little bit, we'll talk about why that increases the deficit. In the mid-90s, under President Bill Clinton, he had a bipartisan agreement with the Republican Congress to raise taxes to an extent and also cut spending. So that's part of the reason why we ran a budget surplus into the late 90s, and then, unfortunately, the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks occurred. So, all right, I'm going to close that up and come back to the notes here. So as of this point, you should know the difference between a budget deficit and a budget surplus, what the government spends its money on and what outlays are known as, and where the government derives its revenue, taxes mainly. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the two tools of fiscal policy and how they're used in the economy, when they should be used, and what their effect is on the government budget and on aggregate demand and real GDP output, okay? So taxes play an important role here in fiscal policy. It's one of the two main tools that the government has, Congress has, to influence the macroeconomy. So when taxes increase, if the government wanted to raise taxes, keep in mind, they're taking more money out of people's pockets. So if you think of it from a common perspective, If the government came and said, hey, guess what? You're going to pay us 10% more out of your paycheck, think of what the effect that would have on aggregate demand and output. So aggregate demand would fall, and we're assuming here, ceteris paribus, all other things equal, meaning that the government is just taking this money in and they're not going to spend it. In a little bit, we'll talk about a combination of the two, of spending and taxes. But for right now, we're just focused on one. The government is just taking money out of people's pockets and then holding on to it themselves. As a result, the government budget is going to move, I'm just going to put an S, towards a surplus. I guess I'm not going to put an S, I'll just abbreviate it, towards a surplus. Because now the government is taking more money in, and they have more money in their vaults. Only the trade-off is they're taking more money out of the economy, which is going to decrease aggregate demand and output. All right, now if you've just flipped it, say the government cut taxes. Hey, guess what? You're getting 5 to 10% back, more back on your tax, on your income, on your paychecks. Government budget is now going to move towards a deficit. And aggregate demand and output will increase because now the people, you think of the tax multiplier. People have more money in their pockets. They're going to spend it in the economy, consumer spending, business spending. It's going to increase output and aggregate demand. All right, flip over here. Let's say government increases spending. Think of the multiplier effect, the spending multiplier, right? Think back to earlier in this unit with like 3.2 and 3.3. Government budgets, when they spend more money, they're going to move towards a deficit because now they're taking that money out of their vaults and spending it in the economy. But hey, you got a good trade-off. The trade-off is demand and output increases. And then vice versa. Let's say the government wants to cut back on spending. They're not spending as much on the roads and the military. So now, again, it's all about trade-offs, guys. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse there. That's a surplus. And aggregate demand and output decrease now. Because now the contractor that was building roads for the government doesn't have work, or the military contractor that was making planes and tanks for the government isn't getting new requests in from the government. Not making money, okay? Hang on a second. Okay, I forgot that my marks carry over into the next slide. All right, so now go ahead and pause the video and read through these 4 bullet points, and then we'll talk about them and I will give you the answers. Go ahead and pause it, think about it, and we'll come back. Okay, so if the government were to cut taxes and increase spending, what type of policy would this be known as? So this is something that's known as expansionary policy, okay? Expansionary policy, okay? Expansionary policy is designed to increase aggregate demand. So now think for yourself. If the idea is to increase aggregate demand and you want people to spend more in the economy, you want people to, you want to lower the unemployment rate, when would you use this? Well, you would use expansionary policy, putting more money in people's pockets by cutting taxes and increasing government spending. You would do this during a recession, okay? So if you wanted to graph this out, okay, here's our quick little aggregate demand graph, okay? You would do this, there's a recessionary gap, right? Short run equilibrium is behind long run, and so what you want to do is you want to get back to long run. You want to drive up aggregate demand. How are you going to do that? You're going to cut taxes and increase spending. So now, the budget is going to move towards a deficit, okay? Budget's going to move towards a deficit because now the government isn't taking as much in and they're spending more. Think about it yourself. If you took a pay cut at work and all of a sudden took out a brand new credit card and put $10,000 in that credit card, you're moving yourself closer to a deficit. So sometimes it helps kids to think of it in that perspective too. You know, like what if you weren't making as much money and were spending more shopping-wise? Yeah, it's not a good idea. Aggregate demand is going to increase. Okay, here's the trade-off in the economy. And look what happens here. Price levels will increase. And now on the opposite hand, let's say the government is concerned that things are going too well. Okay? Now this is an inflationary gap, right? The idea here is they want to bring aggregate demand back. They want to tighten the reins a little bit. They want to lower price levels. They're concerned about inflation. So what the government's going to do here is they're going to take money out of the economy. How? Well, hey, guess what? Now you owe us 10% more in income taxes. Hey, military contractor, we're not going to order 100 jets from you. We're only going to order 10 jets from you. We're only going to build 2 bridges this year. This is known as contractionary policy, C-O-N, okay? Contractionary policy. Contractionary policy is designed to contract. Think of contracting. Contracting, you're shrinking the economy, okay? Contractionary policy. So the budget's going to improve because now it's moving closer to a surplus. Aggregate demand is going to fall, and price levels are going to fall. And you might be wondering, well, why would you ever want to do that? Why would you want to decrease aggregate demand and take money out of the economy? Well, there's been situations in the past, late 1960s, early 2000s, possibly even 2007, where the values of homes, the values of goods and services were increasing much too fast. And so the government became concerned about inflation. And so what they should do is they would cut spending and increase taxes, because now people are going to spend less, and that's going to moderate the economy, bring it back to full employment. Okay? So a quick recap here. You got expansionary policy. When is it used? Recessions. What is it? Cutting taxes, increasing spending. When the economy is going too well, prices are heating up too much, what are you going to do? Government, you're going to cut spending, you're going to increase taxes. What type of policy is that? That's contractionary policy. You want to shrink the economy, okay? Topic 3.9 deals with what are known as automatic stabilizers and discretionary spending. So automatic stabilizers are things like income taxes, like our progressive national income tax, things that kick in automatically and moderate the economy without the House of Representatives, without the Senate having to pass additional bills, without the president having to authorize further action. Okay? It happens, think of the term itself, automatic. It happens automatically. So here's an example. Here's how automatic stabilizers help moderate the economy. All right, so if you have a recession, let's start with a recession. All right, unemployment's really high, price levels are low, businesses aren't spending as much. Here's how an automatic stabilizer kind of brings the economy out of a recession. So what happens is, with income taxes, since income taxes are automatically in the economy, what's going to happen is people are going to decrease as their income drops. As people lose money during the recession, they're going to pay less in taxes. And what the government's going to do is things like Medicare and welfare benefits. Those automatically kick in. So as people go and apply for unemployment benefits, for unemployment insurance, for welfare, those things don't require further congressional action. Those will kick in right away. And so it's not like when in a recession, when, say, COVID-19 hit in March, the U.S. Congress had to go and say, all right, now everybody can get unemployment. No, if you lost your job, you could automatically qualify for unemployment. Now, does the government sometimes step in and authorize additional spending? Yeah, and what that's known as is discretionary spending. So here's a great example of discretionary spending. In March, when COVID-19 really hits home in the United States, people apply for unemployment that lost their job, and they get it. All right, that's fine. There's an automatic stabilizer. But now it's getting to the point where businesses are shutting down. Nobody's traveling anymore. And so the government becomes so concerned that unemployment benefits aren't doing enough that they pass that stimulus bill. So the stimulus bill, in which everybody received at least $1,200 in a check, businesses were assisted with low interest loans, that's an example of discretionary spending. It has to be done at the discretion of Congress. It requires further congressional action. So the stimulus bill that was passed, I think in April, if I recall, was a great example of discretionary spending. The automatic benefits that people receive, like food stamps and lower tax, income tax and unemployment benefits, that's an automatic stabilizer. So here's how automatic stabilizers would regulate the economy when it's going too well. All right, so in an expansion, think about it. The unemployment rate is very low. Everybody's working for the most part. People are making more money. Incomes tend to rise during an expansion. So as a result of that, think of our progressive tax system. As you earn more, you pay more. So that kind of takes a little bit more money out of people's pockets as they're earning more and might moderate the economy slightly because people are now paying more money in taxes to the federal government, both individuals, firms, and businesses. Okay? So to recap here, make sure you understand the difference between automatic stabilizers and discretionary spending. Discretionary has to require further congressional action. COVID-19 stimulus bill. Okay? Automatic stabilizers, no actions required. They automatically regulate the economy to an extent, and those would be things like our progressive tax system, welfare, food stamps. Okay, so pause the video right here and see if you can come up with the combination of fiscal policy tools that would correct both these macroeconomic situations. All right, so for the one on the left, you obviously see that this is a recessionary gap, right? You got short run equilibrium behind or to the left of long run. And so what is going to be needed here? Well, what's going to happen is the government is going to cut taxes and increase spending, which is going to move aggregate demand to the right. And now you're at 81. And now you might get a question here that asks, what's the effect on the unemployment rate and price levels? Well, we know that price levels are going to increase and unemployment is going to decrease because output is increasing. Anytime output increases along the x-axis, unemployment falls. Okay? Could also ask, what's the effect on the government debt? This is going to move the government closer to a deficit. The one on the right represents an inflationary gap. So what is the government going to do here? They're going to increase taxes and cut spending. The idea behind this is you want to regulate inflation. And look, you did it. Price levels go from here to here. The trade-off is that you have decreased output and increased unemployment rates. But another trade-off is that now the government budget moves closer to a surplus because the government's taking more money in and they're spending less in the economy. So if you want more videos, there are 5 of them in AP Classroom, 3 for topic 3.8, 2 for topic 3.9. If you want further information on stabilizers and discretionary spending and fiscal policy. But right now, let's get out of here and let's look at some practice that you guys can do on your own. Right now, what I want you guys to do, go to AP Classroom, pull up topic 3.8, 3.9 practice, and you can take this practice with me. I'm going to do this with you, so you can pause the video, and when you're ready to go, play the video, and we'll get going. Okay, so the first question in this 10-question set is an FRQ. And on the FRQ, I want you guys to complete parts A through C2. Parts D and E we have not got to yet. D connects with Unit 4. E connects with Unit 6. Okay? So pause the video, try it out if you haven't already done so. And here is what your answers should look like. Well, at first, Canada is in an open economy. They're in a recessionary gap. That's important. You want to underline key things that you should be able to use when you graph it. Okay? You have to draw a graph. You make sure you have Y1 and PL1 for your short run equilibrium. There's your long run equilibrium. And here's what your answers should look like for A and parts C1 and C2. So for part A, your graph should look like this, without the shift in aggregate supply. There's my short run equilibrium, Y1, there's PL, there's YF. So if you labeled those, I believe you get 2 out of 2. I believe those were 2 separate questions. You get 2 points right there. Part B asks about the relationship between short and long run, and in the long run, if there's no government action, what's going to happen? So if you formed a response around nominal wages will fall because you're in a recession, business prices will fall because you're in a recession, inflationary expectations fall because you're in a recession, which decrease input prices, shifting short run aggregate supply to the right, back to full employment, boom, you got it. You don't have to say all of those things. Pick one of them. Nominal wages falling because workers are willing to go back to work for lower wages. Business prices falling. Input prices falling. Or inflationary expectations falling. So then what you had to do for, I think, B2 is you had to show the shift. So I did it right there. Short run aggregate supply to SRAS 1. Now you're back at full employment. And part C asks about multipliers. And it asks, if you had an output gap of $40 billion, $40 billion, and the government wanted to either cut taxes or increase spending to close that output gap, to get you back to full employment, what should the government do? Well, here's C1. The first step you have to do is find what your multiplier is. The marginal propensity to consume is 0.8, so 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. You want to find how much government spending would be required to close that $40 billion output gap. So your output gap divided by your multiplier is 8 billion. So you need $8 billion in government spending to close that output gap. But let's say the government wanted to cut taxes instead. So you wouldn't even have to use the tax multiplier if you remember that the tax multiplier is always 1 less than the spending. So the tax multiplier is 4, MPC over MPS. Output gap is still the same. We're looking to close a $40 billion output gap. So 40 divided by the multiplier of 4 means that the government would have to cut taxes by $10 billion to close that output gap. And there's your answers for the FRQ. So let's move on to number 2. All right, number 2, it says automatic stabilizers can do which of the following? Okay, so pause the video, see if you can try this out. And the correct answer here would be part D, would be option D. Automatic stabilizers cause tax revenues to decrease when gross domestic product falls and increase when gross domestic product increases, because if GDP is falling, that means people are earning less money, so people are paying less in taxes. When GDP is increasing, people are making more money. You're in an expansion, so the government's going to collect more in income taxes. Number 3, a major advantage of automatic stabilizers in fiscal policy is that they can do what? So pause the video, see if you can answer it. And the correct answer here is D. Automatic stabilizers, the nice thing about them, you don't have to pass new acts. Congress doesn't have to do anything. Those things kick in automatically as they were intended. Number 4, which of the following will cause an increase in aggregate demand? So the correct answer here would be a decrease in income taxes. So we're looking for something that's going to shift AD to the right, and that's going to be income taxes. That's going to be putting more money back in people's pockets. Number 5, which of the following statements best describes the concept of an automatic stabilizer? So this is again 3.9 practice, and the correct answer would be A. It is non-discretionary fiscal policy that mitigates, meaning moderates, business cycles. It increases aggregate demand during recessions, because that's like unemployment benefits, welfare, food stamps. People have more money, and they're going to spend a little bit more during a recession because they get unemployment benefits. And it decreases aggregate demand during expansions. Why? Because tax revenues go up. People are paying more in taxes. Number 6. Which of the following is an example of fiscal policy? So the correct answer here would be A, increasing spending to build highways. That's infrastructure spending and would stimulate aggregate demand. All the other ones, B, C, D, and E, we were going to learn about in the next unit. That's Unit 4. Those all have to do with the Federal Reserve and central banking. All right, we're almost there. Number 7. Okay, so here you have to pick a combination of taxes and spending that's expansionary. Okay, so think, what's expansionary? What's the intention of it? Expansionary, you want to grow the economy, right? You want to increase what? You want to increase aggregate demand. You want to help out businesses and consumers. So the correct answer here, go ahead and pause the video, would be B. You want to increase government spending and cut taxes. This is going to put more money in people's pockets and firms' pockets. That's the intention of expansionary fiscal policy. All right, hopefully you're 7 for 7. Got 3 left. What's another example of expansionary fiscal policy? So what you're going to do here, increasing government spending, growing the economy. If this was contractionary, a contractionary fiscal policy would be like decreasing government spending or increasing, right here, taxes. That would be contractionary. All right, 8 for 8, hopefully. Last 2. Number 9. If you're in a recession, again, guys, underline key terms here that would help you answer the question. We're looking for fiscal policy, so we're thinking taxes and spending. How would it be used in a recession? An appropriate fiscal policy to combat a recession would be to increase. Here's another key term. We're looking for something in which, if it increased, it would help combat a recession by increasing what? Aggregate demand. Thinking aggregate demand here. Okay, that would be government spending. And because by increasing government spending, it's going to put more money in businesses and people's pockets. All right, last one. Number 10. Read through it. Which of the following are most likely the short-run effects of an increase in government spending? So if the government spending were to increase, and again, guys, graph it out. Okay, so we got just aggregate demand, aggregate supply. If the government is increasing spending, what kind of fiscal policy is that? That's expansionary fiscal policy, right? You're putting more money in people's pockets. So what's going to be the effect on aggregate demand? It's going to increase. Well, now, look at what the effect is on output and price levels. That'll help lead you to the answer. So we know that output's increasing, which means that more people are working, and price levels are going up. So if you look through these, you can use process of elimination, or you could just try and find the one that says unemployment rate's going to decrease, prices are going to go up, and output's going to go up. And the correct answer is C. So hopefully you're 10 for 10. Try out the quiz right now. Watch the videos in AP Classroom if you want more assistance, or hit me up with questions if you got them. All right, guys, hope it helped.